Hello everybody, welcome to Car Dealer Live. You might be looking for James and be slightly disappointed you've got me today, but luckily I'm in some good company who I'll introduce you to in a minute. Unfortunately, James was taken ill overnight, has had a short stay in hospital, he's back home now, but I'm going to be stepping in. My name is Rebecca Chaplin, you might remember me from the old Trade Plates Day or CDX or as editor of Car Dealer magazine previously. Today with me I've got Neil Smith, Operations Director of Imperial Cars. He's going to be sharing some of his views about what's happening in the industry and what's been going on in his own business. We've also got Stephen Latham from the NFDA, who's got some interesting insight on what they've been doing, and Steve Young from ICDP. Got it right?
ICDP.
I will try not to say that again. He's also going to be sharing some of their research and insight into what's going on in the market at the moment. As usual, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to send in your questions. There's just a little comment box and I'll put them to our panelists. But I'm going to kick things off by asking Neil to just talk to us about what is going on in your business at the moment and what are the challenges you're facing.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Similar challenges to everybody else, I think. The uncertainty, the unknown, trying to pick our way through this at the moment, trying to navigate our way through the initial days and then starting to look a little bit forward as to where we go from there. I've read a few articles online, obviously seen some of the webinars. I think, you know, a lot of the time it's mentioned that we're at war right now. I think for us as a business, we're trying to cover off any angle possible at the moment to ensure we've got a stream or a feed of inquiries coming through that we can start to look at taking deposits on cars ready for when we come out of this. There's got to be an element of positivity there, and that's what we're trying to search for at the moment. For me personally, we're also looking now at where this industry goes and where the market goes once we come out of this, whether that be May, June, July, August, whatever that could be. I think what it's done has massively accelerated everybody's view on online sales and deliver to the door, and how we can facilitate that faster and quicker moving into that unknown period. It's very much, if you want to take the war analogy forward, it's very much the battlefield now is online, and it's an arms race now in terms of online fulfillment tools, end-to-end fulfillment, and that's something that I know myself and many others are rapidly coming to market with to see how we can facilitate that as quickly as possible. I know for us as a business, we had that in mind over the last year, really, but we've taken our time, and I think this has just really focused the mind and made us look at not only the current situation with regards to the virus, but also competitors coming in the market, the likes of Gazoo, who've sort of helped push that forward. And it's almost a perfect storm that's given us the ability really to focus our mind in that area and look at what we do to facilitate that. On another note, we're looking to, or I'm looking, and the business is looking to really cooperate and collaborate with competitors. You know, I've certainly had some very refreshing, enlightening, informative, insightful conversations in the week leading up to lockdown and since with many of the competitors that we would maybe not normally be as open and transparent with, but it's been a case of putting a phone call into those individuals and having a real open chat about what they're seeing from a market perspective, what they're seeing in terms of numbers, leads dropping up until that point of lockdown. And it really has been very refreshing, the level of communication we've been having amongst 10, 11, 12 of us with similar businesses. So really, hence the reason that I've also gone forward and looked at setting up a LinkedIn group, looked at setting up WhatsApp groups to try and bring these businesses together in a time when we can all learn from each other and can all help each other. So if there's any positive out of this at the moment, it's that level of collaboration that we're seeing and the level of cooperative initiatives that are out there. So in a nutshell, really, I don't want to labour we all know where we are and we all know that we're in a place of uncertainty. So that's really what we as a business are doing and what we're trying to do to actually get this community together and come out of this hopefully stronger and leaner than before.
Do you think the car industry is ever going to be the same again?
100% no. I don't, there is no doubt in my mind that coming out of this, it will be a completely different landscape. Now, how long that takes to materialize is fully dependent on how long we take to come out of this. And then, even then, when will the consumer confidence come back into the market? You know, we've got unknown challenges ahead in terms of redundancies within every industry. How many people are going to be in the market to buy a vehicle? How many people are going to have the resource, the finances to do that? So I fully believe that the structure as we see it now, either that be franchise groups or UK independent retailers or small independents, I see that changing completely. And I'm sure Steve and Stephen will have a view on that as well. But yeah, I don't anticipate we're going to come out of this as the same businesses.
So Stephen, at the moment, you guys are kind of critical, working to campaign for the industry. Can you tell us a bit about what your focus is at the moment?
Yes, good morning, everyone. The issue is we represent most of the dealers in the UK, and obviously we're trying to help, but you know, the motor dealerships are all very different. We've got some very small operators, family driven, we've got some massive groups, and all of them have slightly different views and interests. And in these uncertain times, people are really looking for definition and what support is there, the clarity and interpretation on it, because as we've seen with some of the legislation that's been brought up in the last 2 weeks, different people have different views of what it means. For our own group, one by one, we're dealing with the legislation, running it past our in-house lawyers to get clarity, and we're feeding that out to our members on a daily basis on such things as job retention scheme, which is the furloughing, HMRC and VAT, late payment interest relief. But there's other things when we talk about interpretation, like we've quite clearly, the government said workshops and repairers can stay open, whether independent or franchise, because the vehicles on the road need to stay roadworthy. Now, that's got a sort of double meaning, because we don't want accidents, and we don't want to be sending more people to A&E and burdening the NHS. So the workshops are open, or not all of them. It's a decision for the individual dealerships and their service team. But we're having a situation where some trading standards think they shouldn't. And so we're having to clarify what the government legislation is. It's a little bit like the police saying buying Easter eggs in Sainsbury's is a non-essential. It's everybody seems to be trying to have a little bit of interpretation, and we're trying to clarify that where possible. One of the other things we've done for our members is when technicians have been driving to work, 1 or 2 have been stopped, and the police say, oh, being a technician, that's not a key worker. Well, it is. And so we've got a legal letter that can be filled in for our members that they can carry just in case they're stopped. So it's those sort of things we're doing, as well as the bigger items, which are like, for instance, the HMRC work time to pay arrangements and so on.
So it sounds like you've got quite a lot on at the moment then. Can you offer any clarity yet, or are you expecting when you'll know what the definitions are for these things?
Well, yes, we are. We are continually working with our in-house solicitors who give clarification. And we pretty much know that, yes, you can open a workshop, but it's not mandatory. We know that all MOTs from the 30th have been suspended for 6 months. But ironically, the message is that the ones before that haven't been suspended. So there could be people driving around unroadworthy cars, which do still require an MOT. And around half the MOT stations, which is around 10,000 stations in the UK dealerships, are open to facilitate those MOTs.
Right. So what would be your advice? Should people be getting in touch with their customers to inform them of this important thing?
Well, I think they can get in touch with their customers, but we don't want to be persuading people to leave their homes. And if they're not using their cars, maybe they just leave the car on the drive safe. But you know, if they do have a problem and their car is likely to let them down, then I would suggest that they make a prior appointment with a dealership to get that repair carried out.
Perfect, thank you. So Steve, can you offer us a bit of insight into the global picture?
Sure, and good afternoon to everybody. We've got sort of a reasonable view as to what's going on, but I think you have to be careful about how you read that across into other markets. So if you look at what's happening in sort of Germany, France, Spain, for example, then broadly speaking, the situation's the same as here, that the car dealerships are all closed for sales, and generally they're allowed to remain open for after sales or after sales for key workers. And that's the sort of government policy. Individual players, as Stephen referred to, have made their own decisions. And so, for example, ATU in Germany, which is the equivalent of, say, Halfords here, have chosen to stay closed, largely from the point of view of protecting their workers' health. And there have been similar situations in France as well. So we're in a very similar situation with some variation in terms of time frame to the continental Europeans. States, obviously, different situation, later going into lockdown, and some very major challenges in some areas. And so in those areas, again, the dealers are closed for both sales and after sales for the most part. China, obviously, is where it all started. They went into lockdown, they're coming out of lockdown. And if there was a sort of a positive note to be taken from the international comparisons, then in China, the big groups there, and they are big groups, have been talking in terms of now being back to 80 to 90% of their previous levels, or the year on year, what they would expect for March activity. They were reporting being back to 80 to 90% of what they would have anticipated 1 or 2 weeks ago, and sort of picking up quite quickly. There's some smaller dealerships who are lagging, and that's usually because they've not been allowed to open, because the Chinese authorities are insisting that they have appropriate protective measures in place for both their employees and their customers. And if they've not been able to do that, then they've not been allowed to reopen. So there's perhaps a lesson there to take on board for dealers here, that they need to think about their preparedness for return to work. But one of the other differences in China is that the influence of the automotive sector, both on the manufacturing side but also on the sales side, is massive in the economy. It's the highest contributor to personal spending on the economy of any of the different sectors: travel, holidays, restaurants, and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of government stimulus, not yet centrally, but locally, to encourage the market to recover. So where there had previously been restrictions on car registrations, then those have been lifted, for example, in a couple of the cities. And I don't honestly think that we're going to see that same level of incentive here in the UK or Europe generally from government to try and get things back to normal whenever that is. So, I would agree with Neil for that and other reasons, that life won't go back to normal in 2 months' time or 3 months' time. You're not going to see the same bounce back that the Chinese dealers are expecting where they're saying that 2020 results will still be in line with forecast, just with the distortion of the timing.
I know consumer confidence, as you mentioned, is a big concern for a lot of dealers, but I know they're also worrying a lot about when new vehicle supply is going to be available, or how much of an effect all these manufacturer factory closures are going to make. Do you have any kind of stats or insight into when we can expect that to come back? Sorry, Steve. I think we might have lost Steve, so I'm going to throw that over to Neil. I know it's going to be a big problem for you in the knock-on of the lack of new cars coming into the market and used cars down the line. What are you thinking on that?
Look, it will depend on how the manufacturers respond, doesn't it? I mean, at the moment, all manufacturing in UK was suspended, what, 2 weeks ago, I think. How that's sort of how that's impacted across Europe, I'm not 100% certain, but yeah, any lack of supply now impacts on us 2 to 3 years down the road. I think for us at the moment, 2 to 3 years down the road is a very, very long time. I think we're, you know, our focus now is right now is day by day, and then as we go through this, it will be what we do in 2 months, 3 months, and how we start to ramp up sales again, and what we do to change maybe our business model and how we really come out of this. And I think Steve's point is 100% valid. China have got such a power, you know, they've got so much power within their motor industry. They are able to come out of this probably far better than we will, or far quicker. I don't know, Stephen, if you've got any insight around manufacturers.
Yes, yes, thanks, Neil. I would say that we've already seen some delays in new vehicle deliveries, and this is a broad-based picture on all makes, because of course they're all interdependent primarily on supply of components throughout Europe. I was told a couple of months ago, or about a month ago, when the Chinese had this problem really bad, that people like Triumph, who make motorcycles in the Midlands, didn't have any wheels because they imported all their wheels from China. And so there is a continual knock-on effect on this. And my view is, with some slowing of supply, we could see some manufacturers rationalize model ranges to make it easier to streamline production when we get up and going again. But there will be an effect. There is no doubt there will be an effect on them, on supply.
Do you think then that, I know some new car dealerships are still selling cars. Is that responsible at a time when we don't know when they'll be able to get them?
There are online sales going ahead, but I'm sure every individual deal is discussed with the customer, and the customer has to make that decision along with the dealership, the feasibility of delivery. If I was ordering a car now for 3 months' time, I probably would place the order, because my expectation is we won't be back to normal, but we will be back to some semblance of normality, hence 3 months' time.
Do you expect we'll get back to any kind of normality with after sales in 3 months' time? I think there's lots of people worried about kind of general maintenance, even, that they would want to get done.
I think there will be huge demand for after sales, because a lot of people, quite rightly, are holding back having their car repaired in service. And likewise, we've now got a 6-month delay on MOTs, which means technically in 6 months' time, we will have a huge amount of vehicles to MOT, and there'll be quite a lot of maintenance that needs to be caught up on. So it's desperately important for the dealers to retain their skilled staff, hence the government scheme if they have to prolong them. And obviously some will be in isolation, but we do need to retain those skills in this industry.
I think in China, after sales has bounced back more strongly than new and used car sales. I mean, the Chinese new car dealers basically don't do used cars, so their business is new and after sales. And after sales came back faster and more strongly than new cars, and I think that's a a positive. The concern I would have about the MOTs in the UK is that where those have been deferred, then that's a chunk of business which is lost. You know, the new car sales potentially will come back ahead of what you would expect as a normal run rate, because there'll be an accumulation of PCPs, PCHs that have been lapsing over the last month and the coming month, and people will need to do something about them at that point. But where someone's had an MOT extended by 6 months, then they're going to be forever on that new anniversary date. So there'll be a hole in that business. But customers will come back for their normal service requirements. So whereas a new car business, you could imagine that the demand might, subject to consumer sentiment, go back to over 100%, if you like. Then the after sales, I would expect, would only go back to 100%, but it might get there faster.
Yes.
Neil, when it comes to used cars, are you predicting you're going to see a kind of influx of sales when we do get back on the road properly?
I'd love to say yes. I think we've just got to see what that consumer confidence is going to be like coming out of this, the propensity to finance cars from the lenders. And it really depends on how long this goes on for. I don't see immediately, even though there will have been a starvation of supply, because obviously we can't sell them at the moment, I don't see an immediate bounce and suddenly we're going to do 150% of what we did on a normal month as soon as we come out of this. I see it as a slow burn, might take 2 to 3 to 6 months to get back to the levels where we would consider that to be the norm. I think we've got to prepare ourselves for that. It really depends. You know, there's talk yesterday that 1 in 5 SMEs are going to go under. You know, that takes out so many people in this country, puts them on unemployment. Those individuals are not going to be wanting to buy cars at that time. Certainly not at the level of car we sell. There's just too many unknowns at the moment to say, as of day 1 out of lockdown, we're going to go back to normal. I can't. In my mind, there is no way that's going to happen. And I think we all have to prepare ourselves and resource ourselves to look at almost a 6-month recovery within this industry for any of us, really. Again, I mean, Steve, I've had the privilege to sit through some of your presentations in relation to what you were seeing the future for used car and new car retailing prior to this. I just wonder if you've got any views now as to how that might have changed.
Yeah, I think you know, your point about consumer sentiment is absolutely valid. You know, everyone is clear that we're not yet at the have seen the worst of this and how it affects individuals. So whenever we come out of it, in whether that's in sort of May or June or July, then you know everybody will have been affected in some way. They'll have lost a loved one, or know someone that's lost a job or something. I mean, the effects are going to be really widespread, and that's going to affect people's confidence, even if they, as an individual, still have a salary coming in and didn't suffer any financial loss during the period. So I think that point was well made. In respect of what happens going forward, then our view is that the future is likely to involve fewer dealerships in the sense that we know them today, so main dealers, if you like, and more leasing, more bundled leasing, with the manufacturers having more involvement in that, and that obviously has a knock-on effect then into used car supply and so on. And before any of this hit, if you go to the end of last year or the first month or so of this year, then we had a lot of announcements by Ford, by Renault, by others, of network restructuring in the UK. And you can certainly anticipate that the timing of that might be brought forward a little bit on the manufacturer side, but also on the, you know, by dealers simply failing or choosing to rationalize their portfolio or whatever. And so we would expect there to be a reduction in the number of dealerships there was after the financial crisis over a 3-4 year period in most European markets, and that's likely to happen here, but it could happen a bit faster if the shock is shorter and deeper. On the lease side, I think all the manufacturers, most of the manufacturers have announced support for the dealerships in terms of extending credit terms, sort of guaranteeing bonuses and so on, or some level of bonuses. And that also, in terms of the financial impact on the dealerships, takes them in the direction that we see as a long-term trend. So the question will be how badly they need to recover their wholesales, I think. You know, the manufacturers declare a profit, declare income when they wholesale the car. And so when they restart production in middle of April, as Volkswagen have said they hope to, or later, then it's important for them to get the production volumes up as quickly as they can, subject to the points that Stephen made about park supply. And they then also ideally want to wind back the support they've done for the dealers as quickly as possible to maximize cash. I'm sure some will do that. It may be that some take advantage of the change that's in place and say, well, you know, this is a direction that we were heading in anyway. And, you know, for whatever reasons, they're in a better position than their competitors. And so they effectively jump forward a year in terms of restructuring plans and so on. Really impossible to say, but there are some aspects of what is going on at the moment which are taking us in the direction of travel that we anticipate for the franchised industry anyway, and then that has a knock-on effect on the used car independents like Neil.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Rebecca, I was just gonna say, Stephen, just before we went on air, you were talking about the sort of representations you're making to the government, etc., and it'd be interesting just to hear how that's developed over the last day.
Yes, I mean, there's certain issues that the government quite rightly put forwards, like the job retention scheme, but in that document, it says that commission is not included. And as we know, so many of our people, particularly in the sales side, but also in management side and finance, are paid on commission. So probably a third basic and 2/3. So we've actually written to Treasury saying this isn't correct. And we've also found out at the same time, estate agents, boat brokers, other people are in this same situation. So we're hoping that we're to hear something on that. The other one is the bank loan interruption scheme, which has been put forward. That hasn't really taken off, and there is quite a lot of criticism of banks saying, "Come on, pull your finger out. The government supported you in 2008. Now support the country." So we are lobbying hard to get these things pushed through now.
And you were saying that the government have requested this all comes from one voice now?
Yes, yes, indeed. We're working as a sector group because used car dealers, motorcycle manufacturers, car manufacturers, lease companies, hire companies, we all have a common interest in it. So we're pulling everything together now to have one central voice. Otherwise, we're just going to swamp the government, number 10, with requests which are all very similar.
I just really wanted to ask Steve, if you don't mind, there's obviously been, this industry is kind of always riddled with problems and they seem to jump out of nowhere, but a lot of them have gone on the back burner because of this massive international crisis. Is there anything we should be still keeping in the front of our minds that we need to worry about that will be coming up in the next 6 months or so?
The restructuring plans will not go away. They are in one or two cases like Ford and Vauxhall, and obviously there's a market trend, which means that they're still dealered for the market share that they had, a couple of decades ago. But the general picture is still that you need to get cost out of today's distribution model in some way, in order to support the investment in online and online related activities like web chat or virtual demonstrations or pop-ups and so on. So the stuff that Neil touched on earlier on. So that has not gone away. If anything, as Neil implied, the fact that people are stuck in their houses and perhaps to some extent have time on their hands mean that they're going to be doing even more online research. They'll be discovering even more resources, whether those are provided by manufacturers or dealers, independents, or people like Kazoo and CarWow and so on. So they'll have gone through a learning curve of their own in terms of online behavior. And you can't overlay the costs of online channels and pop-ups and so on the existing model, because there's just not enough money to go around, as any dealer will tell you, in terms of looking at their bottom line. So you need to make changes, and there are changes that manufacturers can make within their own business to take out costs. They create a lot of unnecessary expense through their manufacturing led requirements, and how that feeds through into manufacturer push and campaigns and so on. But the consumers will have changed, and the manufacturers need to provide support. The dealers need to respond to that, and therefore you need to take cost out somewhere else. And so the transition from predominantly face-to-face to an omni-channel world, so one where the customer's got the freedom to choose online or physical at each stage of the process, is going to be accelerated. Our view, based on our own consumer research, is that there will only ever be a minority, today less than 4%, want to do the whole process end-to-end online. But the fact that the demand to do online at each and every stage of the process exists, even though it may be different for different people, means you need to provide the end-to-end capability. And so that's what will be waiting for us when we get back to business as usual, or business as whatever it's going to be in the second half of this year or next year, is that move that will have been pushed forward. So that's not going away.
Yeah, I think what Steve's just said is already been happening prior to this crisis. The amount of research retail customers do into new product is a lot more online than they used to, and the visitations and demonstrations to new car dealerships tends to be more a final choice to actually acquire the car and order the car. And we've away from the days of going around to 6 or 7 showrooms to look at models. People have already moved online to what they are considering to be their purchase. So we've already seen it, and I think what Steve's just saying is this is going to accelerate it still further, because people have learned how to get additional information from the webs.
Yeah, I think just to comment briefly on that one. I mean, we have asked for and never found any evidence that people ever visited dealerships 6 or 7 times. But Stephen's absolutely right that the average number of visits from a customer for a new car today is sort of crudely a little bit over 3 visits to a little bit over 2 dealerships. So and that's up to the point of signing the contract. So they're basically doing their online research, and then they're visiting 2 dealerships, often of the same brand, in order to strike the deal. For used cars, it's sort of one more than that, and that's because in the past we've had to actually go and physically look at the car in order to determine whether that particular car, its condition and specification and so on, is what we want. But if you look at what Neil's done with Imperial and the quality of the presentation of the used cars there online, then you could expect perhaps an even more rapid trend towards reduced dealer visits, as long as you're providing the sort of visibility, transparency, documentation, and so on as Imperial do. So it's going to accelerate.
Well, thank you all. That's been really interesting. I think we can probably all agree that the trend was going this way, but I don't think anyone anticipated this would be how it happened. Thank you to people who sent questions in. We have sort of covered them already, so I'm going to apologise and say we won't be doing them again, but please do watch the video when it goes online later today, and you should be able to get answers to your questions. Thank you all so much for coming on the show. It's been great to hear your thoughts. I'm sure the guys, if anyone wants to ask you any questions, you're all on LinkedIn and other social media. And I know you're all there to help a lot of the time. So thank you. We're going to have Jamie Capel from Carkey on the show tomorrow, possibly with me, possibly with James. We'll see how the land lays tomorrow. But thank you again, and we'll see you all again tomorrow.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
guys.